I'm a registered psychotherapist, and today we're back on our Facebook Live with Richard and Anya.
So last week, unfortunately, Dana, we're happy to see you here. Last week you were feeling unwell, but I'm sure you tuned into the episode that Anya and I had.
Not really. I had a migraine.
Okay. Well, obviously you're not a team player. But we were talking about myths and misconceptions about naturopathic medicine, right? And I think Anya did a fantastic job of not only introducing herself to the medical community, especially out here in, we call it the greater Hamilton area, right? But also sort of clearing up, I think, a lot of myths and misconceptions, maybe not all of them, because unfortunately there's a lot about naturopathic medicine. But, we were talking about sort of like having a little bit of a theme, talking about a lot of other myths and misconceptions. I think one big one that's coming around sort of this general time of year, flu season, right? We've kind of been in a flu season for the last 2 years, right? But, I think there are a lot of myths and misconceptions. And, I think people also have myths and misconceptions about what, which doctors like yourself would prescribe for, this kind of time.
And in case some people don't know, Dr. Anya is a naturopathic doctor who works here at the practice.
Yeah. So just like to make fun of her. But it kind of ties into, again, that mental and physical health, right? Because I think, normally around the flu seasons, people tend to feel a bit kind of anxious, apprehensive, because I think it's not that we struggle from a lack of information. I think we struggle from an inundation of information. And I think especially now with the last 2 years with, COVID and everything like that, that, there's a lot of, say, misinformation and things like that. There's a lot of confusion about sort of how can I best protect my health and the health of loved ones around me.
Without becoming neurotic.
Yeah, exactly, right? So how can we stay within that standard deviation?
So I think in this episode, the important thing is to know we can cover the neurotic part, but how do you cover the physical part? Which is what Dr. Anya is here again today to talk to us about immune health.
Yes, so my name is Dr. Anna Gretschik, and I'm a naturopathic doctor here at RD Psychotherapy, and my friends and family call me Anya. So that's why we hear the two names. So it's still the same person. But
different personalities? We cover that here too.
Yep. Today we're talking to Dr. Anna.
We're both registered psychotherapists, so
yes.
It's a top, right?
Our offices are upstairs.
She can take one personality, I can take the other one.
I'll split them up. So today we're talking about the physical health and how to protect yourself as we enter the winter and the cold months. And if you aren't following me on social media, go follow me. But I recently shared 5 friendly reminders on how to stay healthy during the holiday season, because we get really busy and it's very easy to forget about ourselves and neglect ourselves. So 5 very simple things that we know we should be doing. So just a nice kind reminder. And going into the post, or actually first, I did an immune talk here at the practice. And one of the things I asked everyone was, look at this picture. Do we do any of these things? And a lot of my friends and family, and even myself, said, you know what? I've kind of neglected that part of my health. And that's totally okay. So the first thing we talked about was water. And we have a constant joke in the office here about water, because we all love our coffee. There's an espresso machine in every room.
That's close to a fact.
Yeah. And but unfortunately, coffee does not count as water.
No.
Yeah, it just
cools down, right?
No.
What if you make iced coffee?
No.
Oh.
We're getting creative. We're getting creative, yeah. No, just water, just regular water. And I just talked about the importance of water and what it does in our body. It provides our H and O into our body, H2O, hydrogen and oxygen, and that's necessary for every part of our body's functions and reactions. Water cushions our bones, our joints, our spine, our brain, and along with the whole immune health, we need hydrogen and oxygen for reactions in our body, and that includes our immune system, like our white blood cells. So yeah, I think all of our goals here has been to incorporate a glass of water before we eat and drink anything in the day.
And I think, studies have also found that an individual who's properly hydrated, the lack of hydration can also help to exacerbate the depression and anxiety, because as you're saying, you're depriving the brain of water, which where is the depression and anxiety generally starts from? It's in your brain. So they have found many studies that individuals who are good on their health, their mental health as well, can be properly treated. So there's a lot of correlation with physical health and mental health.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing. One body.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect, right? And something as simple as a glass of water can make you feel good and just boost your mood that day.
What you were saying as I cut you off?
Oh, I probably had something brilliant, but I forgot. No, when it comes to water health, yeah, it is extremely important. I remember one thing in the military is there was a real reluctance for a lot of troops to drink water. And I remember oftentimes sort of lining up troops and, everybody having to, hold their canteens upside down to see if any water would come out. And you'd see lots of times a lot of water coming out. And, it was kind of understandable. Like, I didn't like to drink a lot of the water either, because you put them in those nasty canteens and everything tastes like plastic. But sort of that idea of, say, staying hydrated, I think a lot of people come to the conception that say, well, I don't need to drink water until I'm really, really thirsty and things like that. And I think there's a difficulty people sometimes run into where people may either underhydrate or overhydrate, where people say drink like excessive amounts of water.
Which is toxicity.
Exactly, where they're forcing the water. Because you said water toxicity. The interesting thing about toxicity is always about dose, right? There's a safe level, so to speak, of rat poison that you can consume. It's very small, but you won't die from it, right? Because everything is all about toxicity.
That's like pissed off housewives who gently kill their husbands, but that's another story.
Yeah.
But as you were talking about, the water, what a lot of people actually don't realize, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember reading this, that if you're thirsty, that means you're already dehydrated.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually mean like, I just
Yeah.
it actually means you already in dehydration.
Yeah.
And that's why this comes. So I remember reading somewhere that you have to start managing your levels of thirst, because if you find that you're entering that more than normal, that means you're actually pretty dehydrated.
And it doesn't say like you have to drink a glass of water every half hour or every hour on the dot, because again, that becomes like quite neurotic and you can't have your life revolving around this. But just even with your main meals or in between with a snack, because when you're so thirsty, you've kind of gone past that level, and then you almost feel so hungry or so thirsty that you're drinking water that you almost feel sick from it afterwards. And then it also depends on what you've eaten that day. And I know if I eat certain or go out to eat certain foods and they're very salty, the next day I feel like I'm constantly drinking water to make up for it.
That happens to me with pizza. If I eat pizza, I feel like I can't stop drinking water. And that's why I like pizza, but at the same time I don't, because I feel like I'm drinking and I'm not thirsty, but I'm still drinking because I feel like I'm thirsty. Like, what the hell is wrong?
Yeah, and I usually get that after, even though it's a soup.
Yeah, I think one thing that, it's also important to realize with, say, hydration is hydration, just even health in general, but even just focusing on hydration right now is, again, military kind of mentality, is that, say, as gross as it sounds, look at your pee, look at your poo, look at your feces, right? If it's black, it's hard. You're probably dehydrated when you're taking a dump, right? And if you're peeing and it's like apple juice, right? That's not a good thing, right? You want it to be sort of like a diluted apple juice. Like normally, you're not expecting, that to just be basically like look like you're peeing out water.
That's happened to me.
Finding a happy medium. Yeah. And everyone's body is different, and I just say listen to your body. It's pretty good at doing that.
So what's the next one after drinking water?
So the next one is going to be stress, and we all know stress is bad, and from the mental and the physical side of health. And I was looking at stress specifically in immune health, and there was an interesting study that I had shared with the office here, and they did a study in the 80s. So, we've known that stress is bad for us for quite a while now. And they took people's blood, like a sample of their blood 1 month prior to their exams. And then The day of their exams, they took another blood sample and they compared them, and they saw that certain markers were lower. And I'm pretty sure there was white blood cells, and I'm sure if they did people's cortisol level, their stress hormone, it would have been a lot higher. And they found that with that, you're more likely to be sick, right? When your white blood cells are down, they're our warriors, they're our soldiers in our body. So when you're exposed to viruses, bacteria, pathogens in general, they go and destroy them. And I like to mention the natural killer cells because that's literally what they do. They kill the bad stuff. And so, yeah, this study found that the day of the exam, these students had lower immune systems and they were more likely to get sick. And they also found that the students who felt super lonely, depressed, and had their mental health really affected from the exam time, it also contributed to a lowered immune system. So we know that stress is bad for us, and this is why we come up with strategies to help modulate that stress, because it will in turn benefit your physical health. And I think I speak for a lot of students, and I'm sure you guys experienced it, was after exams, you came home from the holidays and you were sick.
You know, I was just about to say that. I've noticed every single time I've been like severely stressed, not like normal stress.
Yes.
Because, if you were to get sick from just normal stress, that, you know, but like severely stressed, I've noticed I've always ended up with a cold.
Yeah.
Like in a cold or something, and I'm like, what? I've been in lockdown for 2 years. I left the house. How did this happen? But it's like you're saying, it lowers the defenses. And I know, especially even looking at from a psychological perspective, we know when individuals are extremely stressed, they also start having very poor quality of health and looking after themselves. So they may not be eating right, sleeping right. It starts to affect all of that. And yeah, it's this real domino effect. So whenever I have a patient walk in and say, you know, I'm suffering from stress or burnout, and you've probably seen the same thing, as we look at the rest of their lives, we see that everything is connected.
Now, the major thing that I bring up with clients, and even just the topic of stress, is making that clear point that stress doesn't cause any kind of illness. Stress oftentimes will make us more susceptible to certain illnesses or things like that. Stress doesn't cause heart attacks, right? But stress can help sort of compromise cardiovascular health and things like that, right? Stress may cause us to observe, as you would say, poor diet, right? Which then has a domino effect
the cardiovascular health,
and things like that, right? But then it's also important to also notice that we don't want to live stress-free lives either, right? Stress is good. That's why we get on roller coasters, right? It's kind of like the idea that I'm going to get on a roller coaster and the stress is going to last 3 minutes, right? Versus 3 days or 3 months, right? And this is a fairly benign stress, right? I'm not getting onto the roller coaster knowing that I have a very high chance of being decapitated, right? It's sort of like I know I'm probably going to get on. It's going to be, I'm going to feel a little bit queasy and things like that. But then I'm going to safely get off stress. Exactly, right? It's the same reason why people see, action movies or thrillers, right? It's kind of like they enjoy that stress, but again, it's short term and it's safe, right? When we're looking again at that prolonged stress, that's what we're looking at.
Exactly what you said, the safe, you're not actually in danger, versus when you're saying the prolonged stress, you actually are putting yourself in danger. There's a lot there that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, and stress is important in our lives, and there is obviously also a negative connotation with it, but stress and the stress hormone cortisol, we need those in our body. We need them to function. So there's an inverse relationship, so an opposite relationship to cortisol and melatonin. Cortisol is what keeps us up and awake during the day, and melatonin starts increasing as it gets darker in the day and gives us the ability to fall asleep. So in the morning, when you wake up in the first 30 minutes, you should have the highest level of cortisol in our body, because that's what wakes you up, gets you started for the day. That 8 to 5, it keeps you up high, and then there's slowly a decline as your day goes. And then, 5 o'clock, that's when it starts getting darker. I mean, minus now because we're in winter, it's darker earlier, but that's why people feel sleepier sooner, right? The darkness starts creating the melatonin pathway, it gets higher, and then you're able to fall asleep at nighttime. But what happens with long-term stress, you have that cortisol high, and you deplete your body's ability to create a normal modulated effect of cortisol throughout the day. And then when you have that long-term stress, that is abnormal, right? You keep a high, and then you get to a point where you can't, and you experience burnout.
Well, it's kind of like the idea that, say, cortisol is actually a good thing.
Yes.
Right? When we're looking at, say, like acute stress, cortisol can actually improve the immune system, right? When we're looking at, say, prolonged stress, which the body actually isn't really meant for, we don't find a lot of animals experiencing, say, prolonged stress. They're experiencing acute stress, which, say, helps them get through that, acute danger, and either the danger is over with or they're over with. But it's short, right? It's not kind of like that, hour drive to, say, from here to Toronto or things like that in rush hour, and you're going to get there late or things like that. So when we're looking at that, I know, for instance, like, say, with a lot of people who have, say, autoimmune diseases, right? When they're given, when we hear people are put on, say, steroids, right? The steroid that they're oftentimes put on is like a corticotropin kind of steroid, right? Which is to increase the level of cortisol in the body, right? So that it kind of puts the immune system down, because it's the acute stress where the cortisol is good. The prolonged stress, the cortisol can actually, I think, put more at risk.
Yeah, but that's actually quite interesting you say about sleep, and that might even be a marker, an indicator for individuals to look at. If you find that you're having a lot of sleepless nights, or potentially even insomnia, maybe it's worth talking to your physician, your naturopath, or a therapist, and figuring out where your stress levels are at, and if that is possibly what's contributing to your issues of falling asleep.
And we'll go into sleep because we know that sleep is very important. And when I was doing the research, they did see that people who slept in shorter lengths, shorter times, had worse immune systems than those who had prolonged levels of sleep, because the nighttime is called rest and digest. During the nighttime, you're resting your body, you're preparing it for the next day, you're digesting all the foods and everything that you ate that day. If you aren't doing that, none of those functions are happening, and your body's ability to do that is getting skewed. It's waking up and it hasn't done any of those things, and you're impairing your body's ability to function. And as well as, I remember reading a study, because during when you're studying, most students don't get enough sleep, and I looked into how many hours do I have to sleep at minimum to remember what I actually studied. And I believe it was 6 hours, so I knew that before an exam, I'm like, this is all I needed, is at least 6 hours. And we know that you can't store what you've learned in your brain and retrieve that later when you're writing an exam, because we need sleep to remember those things. That's when we do that at nighttime, is when we're resting, we're putting those things into long-term storage and memory. Yeah, and then during the nighttime with sleep, the hormones are being balanced, and they do see an increased risk of obesity, type 2 diabetes, other cardiovascular risk factors. And we talking about blue light glasses here, and blue light blocking glasses specifically. You don't want to put blue light in your eye, you want to block it away. And we talked about on the cell phone, you can kind of shut it off at a certain time. You can do it with your laptops, and I know even with TVs, they have a setting where it'll be more of those orange lights, not the blue lights that are shining in your eyes. And we do know that blue light does interfere with our melatonin production. So when you're sitting there late at nighttime and you're struggling falling asleep, we know that. We know we should put it away, but that's not the reality for most people. We do end up staying on our phone and using it as a tool to fall asleep. So we have these little things that we do to, help our body fall asleep. And I invested in some blue light glasses myself, and I 100% fall asleep way faster. And it's great. We're still doing a lot of research in it, but it does definitely relieve your eye of strain and fatigue. And I think they're doing some research in the benefits of using blue light blocking, and specifically age-related macular degeneration and cataracts. But, for something that's, super cheap to buy, and isn't harmful to your body, I think it's worth the investment. You know, we still have a lot of research to come, but I think it's worth it as it is.
I think a lot of times people also they buy into things that are sometimes expensive, right? So it's kind of like, well, blue light, that sounds kind of like simple. That sounds like, it probably doesn't work. It's probably a gimmick. So I'm going to spend money on something that's probably ineffective, but I'm going to feel like it's a kind of a placebo effect that say, well, if I pay a lot for it, it must mean it's going to be really good, right? Versus, these blue lights and everything like that. It seems fairly, again, cheap, simple, therefore it's probably not useful.
Yeah, and I think that we often think, even as like people, when we're buying things in store, foods or services, you think the more expensive the better. And honestly,
I'm frugal as hell. Right? But, no.
But honestly, when it comes to these things, like the blue light, it's simple, it's cost effective, and I do think the benefits weighs out like the lack of research. Or I mean, there is research out there, but in terms of the actual physical eye degeneration health, we aren't going to see that for at least the next 40 years, right? Because we just started doing these in our electronics and people wearing these years ago. We need long-term research, but they're definitely not harmful.
No, I think that's the key one, right? That's kind of like, well, we don't really know much about it yet, so it's sort of like, well, let's wait for the research, right? But you can also try it out and not really be really at risk. I myself, I don't know, but I don't see, maybe I'm just ignorant, but I don't see like what is the major harm that will come out of them, except maybe I've wasted a few dollars on glasses that don't work.
I mean, we waste money all the time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I have noted to people before is like the most important thing when you're looking at your health is considering the fact that yes, to be healthy, it can cost money. Yes. But a lot of people have no problem going to the movie theater for an hour and a half and dropping, with them and their partner. And when was, prior to the pandemic, going to the movie theater was not a problem. But between two people, you could easily drop anywhere between $50 and $60 once you include tickets. And
some snacks.
Yeah, some snacks. And if you're not just going to sit in the regular one, but you want, either the VIP one or, because VIP is lovely, right? At the ending, plus the gas to get there. Yeah. But then I see people complaining about, getting simple things like vitamins and minerals. Yeah. Or like you said, getting blue light glasses, which is something that's actually going to last you a very long time. Versus,
one-time investment.
Yeah, versus an hour and a half of an immediate gratification. Yeah. So I do tell people that when it comes to the health, I understand that things cost money, but it a hell of a lot costs you more later on when you're having to constantly treat it. So I'd rather invest and as Richard said, just because it's more expensive doesn't mean, like you're saying yourself, doesn't mean it's actually better. Mm-hmm. It just means you should do more research versus if the price tag is worth it. Not if the invention is worth it, as the price tag is worth that. And do research and look around.
Yeah, even talking about research, one thing that you had mentioned just sort of in passing was like saying buying vitamins and things like that, right? I think, sure, there's a lot of things we can get from our diets in terms of, say, the appropriate vitamins, minerals, and all those things. But, when you're saying like looking at research, right? A lot of research, again, on PubMed, when we're looking at even like longitudinal studies and things like that, that one of the big things that we hear about, say, flu season, colds, and things like that is vitamin C. Everybody drink orange juice and that kind of stuff. But vitamin D being a big one that was also coming out as critical also in sort of like a critical vitamin to be having during say flu seasons and things like that. Which is kind of ironic because again the days are shorter, right? So we would suspect that some people are getting less vitamin D anyway. My understanding from the research is that say you don't need to be say sitting out in the sun for like 3 hours to get the appropriate amount of like say vitamin D. But when you're thinking about somebody who say wakes up in the morning, it's dark, right? They get in their car, they go to work, they work in an office where there's no access to say sunlight through like a window and things like that. Then they drive home, it's dark, they're actually getting like almost no sunlight, right? So where are they getting, say, that vitamin D that they need for just optimal functioning?
And you're correct. And I know in Canada, they always mention to Canadians, always get, make sure you always have a proper dose of vitamin D. And that's why it's important to talk with your naturopath and/or your medical doctor so that they can do labs on you to see where your levels are at throughout the year, not just the winter, but you're correct, throughout the year, because even in the summer, a lot of people with the whole skin cancer and everything nowadays don't like to go out either. So you want to make sure that you're speaking to a professional and having those measured throughout the year so you know what safe dose you should be at. And I totally agree with you. You know, vitamin D, vitamin C, all these things are very important for you, especially throughout the flu season, to make sure you are properly dosing yourself accordingly so that way you are safe. But again, you can only do that with a healthcare professional who can measure your levels.
Yeah. And I mean, I summarized that very well. And vitamin D as Canadians is extremely important. It's included in our Canada's health food guide. Most Canadians are insufficient, and that's from Public Health Canada. But it is also important to monitor those levels. Some people self-dose and self-diagnose.
Not safe.
Yeah, not safe, because it can get very unsafe, and I have heard of that. So that's when you're actually like, no, you're pretty good. You don't need to be doing this anymore. And it's important to get that tested. And as a naturopathic doctor, I have the ability to requisition blood work. When it comes to vitamin D is not actually covered by OHIP. So I tell people that a lot of the times too, because when I'm requisitioning blood work, it isn't covered under OHIP. It is out of pocket. Vitamin D is one of those things that you gotta pay for it anyways. Yeah, and again, it also circles back to there's a lot of things we pay for. For example, Starbucks, and I mean, I love my Starbucks too, and you think about it, you're okay spending $5. Some people spend it every single day on a drink, but you hear that $35 to check your vitamin D levels for the next couple of years, and you're like,
you know what? And I will say, I remember a few years back, I got very sick. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I was exhausted. I was like brain fogged. Like I just felt like pure garbage. I was getting sick all the time. I didn't know what was wrong. I was like, you know what? I'm probably dying. I probably have cancer. You know, we all go to that. I went to the doctor and they're like, oh, you just have bad vitamin D levels. So, you know, they send me, I paid for it because at this point I was willing to pay gold if that would find out whether I had cancer or whether I was just, you know, I knew something was wrong. They put me on vitamin D. I was severely depleted. They put me on vitamin D. And within literally like 3 days, my world went completely back to normal. But then, as you said, they gave me too much. And so the adverse happened to me where I went right back into exactly what I was originally feeling. So they sent me again to get tested. And they said, oh, you're actually so off the charts that it can't be read anymore. So they said, okay, stop taking
now it's time to go back.
Yeah. And they brought me down for nothing for 2 weeks. And then they put me and now you've put me down twice a week.
Like a regular dose.
Twice a week, a regular dose. And it's been fantastic. And honest to God, I thought I was going to die. I felt like I was going to die. I had no energy. It was one of the worst things. But that's how important vitamin D is. But anything else would send you on a wild goose chase with just simply paying those $35.
Exactly. And it's like, those are objective measures. You can't really disagree with. They're there. They were calculated, and that's where they're at. And that was it. Like you could have gone on a wild goose chase.
That's why they figured this out in the summer.
No, sorry.
Yeah. So in the summer,
I'm depleted at any time.
Yeah, it's $35 for like the jar of those.
No, just to go to like Life Labs or Care and
it's okay for the time. Yeah.
So then, if you don't mind me asking,
it's like $10, $12.
$10, Now that's also
like 120 in there.
I was gonna say that that's $10, not for each hit. That's for the whole goddamn bottle.
And there's 120 in there, and I'm still on the same bottle because I can only take it twice.
So like $12 when you think about it is really not that much. $12, which again you get the whole bottle, and you know, again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a naturopathic doctor, but I don't think you'd have to take like all 100 at once.
No, of course not. And that happened to me in 2019. And it happened to me in 2019. I think you remember you and I were working at that time together, and I kept telling you, I don't feel well. And something's wrong, and I was always exhausted. And everybody would ask me, "Are you sleeping well? Are you eating well?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know." And in my mind, it was like, "I'm dying. I'm dying." I didn't want to say it out loud because I didn't want to.
This is a consequence of being Canadian. They know it. There's something, the way we sit in Canada on the equator, we're further away from the sun. We don't absorb it as much. Even in the summer, if you were to sit outside, they're saying that there's no way you'd be able to absorb it. And then, you have the whole argument of like, okay, well, I'm gonna sit outside, but like, am I also increasing my risk of skin cancer? And then when you're using your sunscreens and your sunblocks, you're also blocking vitamin D at the same time. So
so
it's like,
so
what do you do?
so at this point it's important to speak to your healthcare provider, get tested,
cheap investment.
It is
Really
the cheapest
cheap
investment, but it literally turned my life around.
And that's literally it. And so and I think the one last thing we were going to talk about was exercise.
Everybody loves.
Well, we actually started here at the practice yoga Mondays, and I like starting Monday with something gentle because you're usually coming down from a fun, exciting weekend and you're kind of pissed off that it's Monday and you're back at work. So at least you can
tell us how you feel about work.
Oh shit. Back here.
Back to the
But I see, and I find that like during the summer, I never work out because I'm usually outside all the time, going on walks, going on hikes, and those things don't feel like a chore to me. I'm going to the beach. I love the beach. We go once a week, and
there's a beach here in Ontario.
Well, we go a Long Point. There's a Turkey Point.
Look, if it's not the Atlantic or the Pacific, it's not really. Keep going.
But so, and then I find in the winter, like, things are going to slow down. So I feel like I'm more determined to make sure that I exercise and feel good because, we also talked about on Coffee and Colleagues, seasonal affect disorder, I think it was, right? And that during the winter you don't feel good. So there's little things you can do to make yourself feel better. And that's exercising and yoga. It's pretty safe. It's not like you don't have to, sweat or, hurt afterwards to know that you got a good workout.
Oh, I was hurting.
You were hurting. I was just confused. The whole time I'm trying not to look creepy, like looking at both of you and saying like, am I doing this right?
So from a mental perspective, exercising is extremely important because as we know, exercising, releases dopamines and all this great stuff, which is like, the happy hormones that we need. And exercise also, especially with yoga, and I recently have been starting again, because after we did it on Monday, I started recommending this again to my patients, because I remember on Monday, after I was done doing yoga, I felt like really calm and really good. That feeling. And then
I thought after we did like the yoga and then the
10-minute hour,
you're gonna feel like, but really great. And then I felt like shit when we did that abdominal.
We nourished our souls.
I will say that yes, Dr. Anya made us do that ab workout, and then when it was, so we're supposed to have our legs in the air, she was just dragging her legs out, screaming, "It's burning!
It was so hard.
It was very hard. And I wasn't a lot of pain afterwards.
That was the only one I liked because I felt like I knew what I was doing at least. But the yoga one, I was just like,
you did it for the picture.
But then you know what? But it motivated me because on Tuesday when I got home, I did yoga again.
Oh, okay.
And then I wasn't even in more pain, but I felt really good.
Good.
And what I've been telling my patients is that, you need to incorporate some form of exercise, but as well as, especially because we're so much in the dark season, also try to incorporate some form of meditation, yoga, or even if you're into prayer, some form of prayer, because, as we said, we talked about seasonal affect disorder. A lot of people become very depressed, throughout the winter. And like Richard said, you wake up, it's dark, you go to work, it's dark, you come home, it's dark. So exercise is also very important because, as we stated earlier, not only does it release these amazing hormones, but it also gives you a sense of accomplishment that when you are done, you're like, you know what, I did that, I feel better. And yoga also helps to relax you. And sometimes it can really help to bring you out of that anxious and or depressed state that you're in.
Yeah, I don't think anyone really regrets exercising afterwards.
No, it's funny. I've never had anyone say, God, that was
the worst idea ever.
Maybe say not my greatest workout, but not really horrible that I exercised. I should have never done that. I should have sat on the couch, ate potatoes, and then just, Netflix and chilled.
But you know what? I think it ties back to kind of that idea of stress. Exercise is stress on the body, right? Mm-hmm. And what you need to do is you have to find what's that appropriate level, right?
Yes.
Where it's kind of like, you were saying, Anya, that say, oh, the yoga nourished the soul and things like that. If yoga is not your thing, then it's not kind of like yoga will make you feel better. Yoga may make you feel better, or you can be like me and you think to yourself, like, look, if I go for a jog, I have to be on the verge of vomiting and I've done a good run, right? But it's kind of like the idea that it's that idea that you have to find what's nourishing for you, right? What makes you feel like you've done something. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind the yoga. I think it's good. I'm just really confused. But that's my goal. I'm going to get better, right?
Yeah.
But
we all have goals.
But we bought the whole series of the Namaste Yogas. We have 5 there. And so you're good, my friend. You are covered now.
But again, it's about finding that balance where it's sort of like
medium for you.
Well, it's kind of like, well, is yoga realistic for me?
Yeah.
Is doing yoga once a week? Is doing yoga every day? Is doing yoga mixed with, say, getting on a treadmill or something like that? Is that realistic for me, right? Because I think the problem too is sometimes people set themselves up for goals that are not achievable,
Unrealistic,
and then they beat themselves up about not being able to do it, right? Because it's like, oh yeah, yoga was great. I'm going to be doing yoga every day, and they're feeling really pumped, but then they can't get into a routine. They fail at the routine, and then they beat themselves up for it. But it was something that was sort of, I don't want to say necessarily unachievable, but still something that maybe wasn't realistic for them at that.
And I agree there. And I think when it comes to exercise, just like anything in life, I like to tell my patients, set an intention. So, like example, if you're going to do yoga every day, set an intention. Why is it you're doing it? Is it because it gave you that small burst of joy? But realistically speaking, you hate yoga and like him, you get lost in it. So that might keep you from wanting to do it. Or is it because you're looking at it, I need to lower my anxiety. I need to, work on my depression. I need to find a stress reliever. So the intention of it is for this. So if you're able to understand your intention, you'll have a better handle that even on the days when you're not motivated, your intention will remind you, but I have to lower the stress level because it's affecting the rest of my life. Versus if you don't have an intention, well, it's no different than we're trying to, and you do this, on clinical nutrition, when you're trying to set someone to eat right until they figure out for themselves that I need to eat right for my health because if not, I'm going to die. It's just fancy words they're taking.
It's whatever makes you successful. And I oftentimes tell my patients because they think I eat a perfect lifestyle, like perfect diet and everything, but no, like that's not realistic. And it's about setting realistic goals because it's very easy for me to give someone something and be like, eat like this and come back to me when you do it. Like, no, that's probably going to make you feel bad. And that would make me feel bad. So I always work with people. Like there's so much more to setting a goal and like setting in a treatment plan. I use scale questions like on a 1 to 10, like how likely are you able to do this? And if it's below a 7, you're not there yet. And I do think that once people start doing things and feeling better and they do something that sets them back, that's usually when they realize, wow, like what I was doing actually before really made me feel good. And that also is a huge motivator for some people. And I tell people like, it's okay to make a mistake, see if it's actually doing what it's supposed to do for you.
Yeah, no, and I think that's right. And I think that's very much how we even deal with individuals on the mental health. When we're giving them, goals or challenges or mental health exercises, it's the same thing. I was talking to someone this week and they said, I didn't follow any of the advice that you had given me in regards to stress. And I realized that, wow, the other times that I did, what a great difference it was. So I really should be taking these coping skills and using them for this. But they admitted, I didn't follow it at that moment. I just let my anxiety take me. And afterwards, I was like, why did I do that if I had these coping skills? So just the fact that they were able to reflect, I was very proud of them.
Yeah.
Because they caught themselves in that
Exactly.
They still let it go, but they were able to bring themselves back and be like, I had these coping skills, I should have done it. And I see the difference from when I have. And so you're completely correct. And I think it's so important. But again, understand your intentions, right? And understand why you're doing this versus it's New Year's and let's set these unrealistic
New Year, new me.
Yeah, which and I know, Richard, I know you always talk about how much you hate New Year's resolutions because they're not only are they unattainable, but they're very unrealistic. Because you always say, why not start right now? Why are you waiting till then?
I was gonna say that's the point for me, right? It's kind of like even if your intention is realistic, why wait for January 1st?
Yeah.
Start now. Why waste the time? Just get after it. Do it right now, right? Nothing's keeping you, right? If you're Jewish, right, the New Year was in September, right? So you're already late, right? So hey,
Nice thing.
so but really, but sure about it, right? It's sort of like, well, if say eating healthy is important to me, right? If something's that important to me, why should I wait? Why shouldn't I just start now?
Well, you're correct, because then you're basing your life based on the Gregorian calendar, and that's not real. That's
Yeah, and I think it's like what's different from tomorrow then will be January 1st.
basically, I believe it's because people are giving themselves all the excuses in the book so they can get away with it until the 1st, because somehow the 1st is supposed to be
A magical day and gives you all the power in the world.
It's no different than when people say, I'm waiting, for the new year. I can't wait for the new year because I can put everything behind me. I'm like, no,
It's still there.
Yeah, if it was like that, none of us would have a job, because then the new year would magically, it's like magical realism. It would make everything that's magic come into real life.
I tried that with CRA once. I said, like, look, I made some bad financial decisions last year, but we're in a new year. I don't want to be living in the past.
Yeah, no, that's not how
And so let's pretend I don't know what we're doing.
And it takes a while to create a habit, right? And I think most of us know it takes at least 4 weeks, a month. And a few years ago when I was reading some books, they actually said it takes a lot longer. A lot of people will actually do like 30-day challenges, and then once they do the 30 days, they're done. They haven't actually created that habit. And so that's why starting with easy goals like once a week, and I was saying how, like, you know what, let's do this for like 6 weeks before we introduce a second day where we do exercise. It has to be manageable. And just to even go off of the benefits of exercise, we know that it reduces our stress hormones. It improves our thymic function, which is an immune organ in our throat. It helps with bone mineral density. It reduces cardiovascular effects, as well as, when you're working on your muscles, it improves your muscles and prevents wasting, right? As we get older, sometimes chronic diseases, you want to be able to maintain that muscle mass, and our muscles are attached to our bones, and that's how you maintain that bone mineral density. And as women, when we enter menopause, we lose estrogen, and estrogen is protective of bones. And I think we were even talking about this on Monday was, there's the whole testosterone and estrogen, and a lot of people think, oh, men have to have more testosterone than women. It's not true. Testosterone and estrogen is important for both of our bodies, but for women, the demand for estrogen is higher, and it's protective, and that's why you see women are more likely to suffer from osteoporosis. And exercise, specifically weight-bearing exercise, is what's going to help maintain that bone mass.
And I think, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the intention, because you just said they do the 30-day challenge and then it's over, because the intention was just to eat a 30-day. It wasn't for actually long-term goal. Yeah. And I think when we look at the immune health, and especially right now with the cold and flu season, as a perfect example, I noticed for a lot of individuals who've gotten the vaccine, they stop washing their hands when they get home. They stop having more, precautions, because, and I tell people, simply because you start doing something doesn't mean you should stop doing something else. Whatever precautions, especially with the flu, whether you're vaccinated or not, you still need to wash your hands, because even if you believe that you can't get it, you can easily give it to somebody else if you are contaminated. Right. So, and I think it's important that everybody keep in mind that whatever healthy habits or intentions we're setting, it's not just for ourselves, but especially with the cold and flu, but it's also for the safeguard of everybody around you. So at the practice, we have very strict policies about as soon as you walk through the door, before you pass go, before you collect 200, sanitize your hands right at the beginning, because as you're going up the stairs and touching the banisters and touching the doors and put your coat away and saying hi to people, hey, Richard, how are you today? I may have just passed him something from just getting out of the car.
Yeah.
So the important thing is keep your normal standards of health, like you're saying, keep them up and keep practicing them, and that can also protect other people. Simple things, cold and flu. Sure, I can't give you if I had a cardiovascular issue, but it sure as hell can give you a cold or flu or COVID if I'm carrying the virus on.
Public health, wash your hands.
All the time. When you get home, wash your hands.
Yes.
When you touch something, just, and again, that's not about being neurotic. It's just about being, realistic.
And we don't wash our hands after touching anything and everything, because that becomes.
But if it's like about a public car, I
Yeah.
could wash my hands. If I'm touching, the door handles and everything throughout this practice, which is huge, I should be mindful of, simple hand sanitizing, and as we have the staff always sanitizing everything, every so often throughout the day.
Yeah, and people are coming in more, so.
Exactly.
Just being cautious.
Clean afterwards. And, I think Richard has said this before, had we always had this practice even prior to COVID, we probably would have had less colds and flus.
Yeah.
Because we would have been more up and up in the society and realizing that we should just, in general, have good, healthy habits. So like you said, exercising, taking proper vitamins, minerals, sleeping well, eating well.
But again, it's also that
throughout the year.
thing on that spectrum, right? Where it's kind of like washing your hands is important. Hand sanitizer is important, right? But if you take it to an extent, it can actually be counterproductive, because then you start to say wash off some of that protective layer, so you actually make yourself more likely to get infection, right?
Yeah.
Because again, when you think about our layer of skin, right, our dermis, that's our first layer of protection against infection, right?
Yeah.
So if I just keep washing and washing and washing, right? Let's say I've worked with clients with, say, OCD and things like that, where their hands are all red, they're bleeding and things like that. They're more actually susceptible. So it's actually counterproductive. When I ask them why they're doing it, right? I don't want to get into such of OCD, but sort of like it's that idea that say, well, I need to be cleaning myself. It's kind of like what you're doing is actually making yourself more dirty. You're actually making yourself more.
The one thing you're so afraid of happening is literally the one thing you're pushing towards with that behavior. Yeah.
And I'm sorry, just to go back also to what you were saying before, Anya, about like sort of measuring things with scales, right? I think the really nice thing about, say, measuring things with scales is, say, if I feel like I'm at a 7 right now, I want to get to an 8, right? And it's kind of like that idea that, say, when we're looking at intention and things like that, think of it this way too. If I do some exercise, right, I might enjoy maybe sitting on the couch and not doing anything, right? But think about that sense of accomplishment that I get from exercising, right? It's kind of like you don't get, at least I don't think, I haven't spoken to anyone where you get a sense of accomplishment from, say, wasting a bag of potatoes, right? But
don't feel the greatest.
Right? Yeah. Not unless you're hitting a Guinness Book of World Records on potato juice.
So it's kind of like, if I meet that, say, my goal, that 8, right? I feel that level of accomplishment and everything like that, right? And that level of accomplishment, when we're talking about standards, right? I'm always harping people about, like, say, maintaining a level of standards, right? Always trying to achieve a higher standard, right? It's kind of like when I get that sense of accomplishment, I want to do more. I'm at that 8. I want to get to the 9 now, right? And
I just imagine you're not running around your house like flexing in every mirror, like, I'm at a 10.
Motivating yourself.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was eating your colorful foods, right? Canada Food Guide, like I had mentioned previously, they did a great job with the food guide a couple of years ago. They had all those portion sizes, and everyone had different ideas of portion sizes. So as humans, really, we do better with visual cues. So it's now like a plate, and half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables, very colorful vegetables. So, potatoes unfortunately don't count.
Potatoes do.
And I like sweet potatoes because they are pigmented, right? They're purple or they're orange, and you get those beta carotenes in there, not like a bland potato, which is just kind of carby, starchy. Very delicious, but unfortunately not very nutritionally valuable. And so half of your plate being fruits and vegetables, because those are the things that are going to be highest in vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, and unfortunately, fruits and stuff like that ripen on a truck versus on the trees. So they aren't as nutritionally high, but focusing on those ones because you're going to get more than nothing. And then having a quarter plate of your protein, and they did a good job of introducing more protein alternatives, right? We think just chicken or beef and stuff. No, they included your nuts, your tofus, and everything. And then the other quarter of the plate being those starches, or those carby foods, and also having a glass of water with your meal, right? You know, it used to be a glass of milk, which actually I believe they have taken away.
Yeah.
So, you know, focusing on those types of foods. They talk about the importance of soy proteins. There was the whole misconception of soy boy that I had to explain here, that, you know, yes, it's a genetically modified food, but everything is genetically modified, and there's a reason why we don't experience as much starvation in the world, and that's because of agriculture, right? And so they talk about soy, they talk about the importance of your fats. For example, there's a reason why the Greeks have the lowest levels of cardiovascular health risk factors, and that's because they eat foods high in your omega-3 fatty acids, which we often eat too much omega-6, 9s here in Canada. So they've also said incorporating more of a Mediterranean lifestyle, getting those fishes, nuts, olive oils, and they actually have that in the food guide too, is pouring 2 tablespoons of olive oil onto your food. And I think a lot of people, we cook with olive oil, but you're actually supposed to put the raw stuff just right onto your foods, because that's when you get the actual cardiovascular benefits of it. Yeah.
And then I would say, I guess, to wrap this up, also when we look at, immune health, also consider your mental health as well.
Yeah.
Which if that is completely in the tank, this is going to be almost impossible for you to keep up. I don't know a single individual who has bad mental health, who's eating right, sleeping right, exercising right,
for sure,
breathing right. Like it's not right. So it's a whole gamut. There are 6 things you really need to look at. And you know, again, if you're having issues trying to figure out your immune health, by all means, speak to a naturopath, and see, or even your physician, whichever one you want to use, or both, and have conversations with them on how to fix this, and as well as speak to a mental health care provider if you're having issues with your mental health, so that while you're working on this, you're also working in tandem on your physical health, because they're not independent of each other.
No.
The mind is still in the body. And I know for years in medicine we've tried to separate, the mind from the body, but the mind and the body work together. They are one person, and so it's important.
Descartes' error.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to work them together. And I even tell people simply with mental health, just coming to see me every day doesn't help you if you're not adding the rest of the physical on. If you're not sleeping well, eating well, exercising well,
Full spectrum of health.
Exactly. It's holistic. So and that's why at the practice, we're very happy that we offer, and we're really pushing harder into that holistic approach. And so that's something you can definitely call the practice and speak to our front desk receptionist about how to get that whole holistic health if that's you and you feel like you're stuck in a rut in both areas.
Yeah.
And or one. So guys, so thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks so much, Dr. Anna, for coming back on and talking about immune health. So we hope you guys have a great and fabulous weekend, and feel free to email us or call us if you have any questions.